Akutami Gege has been nothing short of excellent since beginning the serialization of Jujutsu Kaisen. It's taken the anime and manga world by storm with its rise in popularity along with its story consistently improving over time. And the most recent arc in the series may be the one that propels it from a promising manga to what could become a classic Shonen Jump title. The Shibuya Incident arc has helped establish the series as one of the top manga not just in Jump but throughout the medium. So let's talk about the Shibuya Incident and how it has played an important role towards Jujutsu Kaisen becoming a powerhouse both in the shonen demographic and among the manga industry today. Let's go. To factor in what makes this arc a renowned success, there are many elements that come into play that help establish its spot amongst the best first major arcs from a relatively new series in the past decade. The anime of course has played a massive role in leading new fans to check out the manga, which has seen its overall value rise to heights many didn't think would happen so soon. Shibuya has gone on from chapter 79 to 137, having officially started in November of 2019 with chapter 83 being the true kickoff to the arc. Since then we've seen the series go on a run of chapters that have further cemented Jujutsu Kaisen's place among the best ongoing series not just in Jump but in manga today. Having finished 2020 as the 5th best-selling manga of the year, whilst finishing on a regular basis in Jump's TOC in the top 5 for the majority of 2020. Before we even get started, I just want to say that while Shibuya technically began with the evening festival in chapter 79, I view that as more so its own separate arc or the prelude to Shibuya. What occurred on October 31st to me is the Shibuya Incident arc, but some parts from the evening festival will be brought up at later points to back up some areas of this discussion. So let's go ahead and start from the very beginning of this incredible arc. The primary objective from the opposition side, that of Geto and Mojito, was to capture Gojo Satoru and convince Sukuna to work with them in their goal of eliminating all non-Jujutsu sorcerers from the world. Now this plan has been in the works since we first met Geto back in chapter 10. Having the King of Curses on their side would almost assure them of achieving that goal. However, it wasn't going to be a walk in the park as the members of TMT sent out their forces into the city of Shibuya to prevent their enemies from causing unnecessary havoc. Shibuya offered us plenty of brilliant moments from start to finish. The opening of the arc featuring Gojo single-handedly making short work of Hanami, Choso, and Jogo before being confined in the prison realm by Geto, or should I say Getu. Gojo was already a beast in his own right, and yet in this fight was another constant reminder while he alone is the honored one. Had it not been for the prison realm, I'm certain that the cursed spirits would have been decimated by Gojo's hands. Granted, he couldn't go all out because the citizens within the area were too much of a risk to put their lives on the line if he were to go all out. Chapter 90 sent shockwaves throughout the Jujutsu Kaisen community with two huge reveals. Geto did in fact die in the prequel manga, which confirmed it now as canon material. Gojo's face has said it all. His memories of his youth reawakened of the time he spent with his former best friend as they see each other for the first time since their last meeting. His six eyes told him this was reality. Geto is here. However, his soul told him that it wasn't the Geto he once knew. What came shortly after that was the second reveal that for me was even more shocking than the first, with it being that someone else had taken possession of Geto's body and is using it as its host. The way this was handled was something straight out of left field. I always assumed that the stitches on Geto's head came from being taken out by Gojo, but it never dawned on me that it was actually how the individual was able to take control of Geto's body. As a twist, it was done very well, and I can see this being one of those moments that the anime are going to have a field day with to showcase how horrifying of a situation this has now become for both Gojo and of course for the fan base. While the true identity of Geto's possessor wasn't revealed until much later in the arc, it was still something that further established the eerie, dark feeling this arc was surrounded with at the very start. As things progressed in the next stage with Gojo's capturing, the TMT members were informed of what had transpired and proceeded to change their original mission in order to rescue Gojo from their capturers. Yuji, Megami, and Ino, who were tasked with taking down the curtain covering Shibuya, proceeded to fight with Owasaka, Ogami, and her grandson. Before diving into the respective fights, I want to highlight the importance of their introduction to the story, but more so the importance of Gojo not just to Japan, but to the entire world. When Gojo was born on December 7th, 1989, the balance of the world was altered. Curse users that took advantage of the freedom of doing what they pleased, such as killing non-sorcerers, had a chill sent down their spine when the user of the Six Eyes arrived onto the scene. Because of that, those cursed users that believed that they were free to do as they pleased could no longer do so because of Gojo's presence and how he was viewed as the gatekeeper from preventing further harm to be caused onto the world. After Nanami learned of Gojo's capturing, he said to Ino and Megami that if the sealing is completed, this country was done for. Ino stated that ensuring Gojo's survival was of top priority, as those who had been living in the shadows waiting for Gojo's demise would once again appear, and the chaos that had been prevented would swallow Japan and later on the entire world in its own version of hell. If they were to start a war against those cursed users and spirits, they would lose, and if they do, the age of humanity, at least within Japan, would be over. This entire exchange has critical information of what could come of the future of the series, as the normal day-to-day lives that our cast have enjoyed for a time would be thrown into disarray if Gojo were to fall or be locked away. Especially given the monster that is Sukuna who lives within Yuji, if the King of Curses were to be reawakened in his perfect state with no Gojo, humanity would perish into oblivion. Moving on to the exchange between Yuji and Megami versus Owasaka, this fight focused on the tactical side of the battle, where the only way the sorcerers from TMT were able to defeat him was to find a balance in their striking power to overturn Awasaka's inverse curse technique. When this technique is activated, any attack that comes towards Awasaka becomes weaker the stronger that they are, and vice versa. On the other side, we get to see Ino versus Ogami and her grandson. This fight saw another crazy twist with the reveal of Toshi Fushiguro, as Ogami's grandson took a pill that saw his soul get overtaken by Toshi's own. At the time prior to this moment, I never thought that we were going to see him again after Star Plasma Vessel, since it was stated that he had perished after the fight with Gojo, but for the time that we had with Toshi in this arc, he did not disappoint. Before we go further with him, we saw another round of fights begin to take place as Nobara went one-on-one with Haruta Shigemo. Whilst I was disappointed initially with how Nobara wasn't the one to defeat him, as we saw Nanami enter the fight, this battle was to showcase to the readers the difference between a rookie like Nobara, who still needs further training to go up against a cursed user that was stronger than her, and the likes of Nanami, who is a grade 1 sorcerer that requires little to no assistance against enemies that he's equal or stronger than. Not to mention what Nanami did to Haruta was well deserved after seeing earlier the results of what happened to Ichiji when the instructor was stabbed from behind and was critically injured. The emotions that stirred within Nanami, having lost Haibara years ago and now seeing another of his comrades who is known for such a long time be in this state, the emotions have finally reached its boiling point, and upon seeing Haruta, all of the anger inside of him was finally unleashed upon the cursed user. Afterwards, we saw Meimei and Uyui take on cursed spirits summoned by Getsu, and that if they were able to overcome them, their next fight would be with the former TMT sorcerer. Meimei was puzzled to learn that he somehow had survived the events of what transpired last year, even after going as far as to wonder if Geto had joined forces with Gojo, to which she dismissed shortly after, as Gojo already had the power within him to erase humanity should he choose to do so. Instead, she came to terms that what was in front of her was in fact a fake. What made this exchange between the two so interesting is that despite knowing that this wasn't the Geto we thought we knew, he was still not someone to overlook. No longer in possession of the curses he had with him in his fight against Okotsu, he still had a number of curses above semi-grade 1 that while someone who's a grade 1 sorcerer can handle, throwing multiple amounts of them at one person will be time consuming and deplete them of their energy as the fight goes on. We also got to see Meimei use her curse technique for the first time in the form of black bird manipulation. It gives her the ability to control crows. However, the true power of this curse technique comes from Bird Strike. When a crow commits suicide, the trade-off is to erase the curse energy limit of a weak bird and hurl it at an enemy. While we're unaware if Yui has a curse technique himself, he was able to form a simple domain which overrode Smallpox Deity's domain expansion, allowing Meimei to make quick work of the cursed spirit. Now, the last portion of this part with Meimei and Getsu more or less confirms something that I've been of the belief that Geto was being controlled by someone else, and of course which was later on confirmed to be true as of the most recent chapters to conclude the arc. When Getsu states that she is the most impressive of a Jujutsu sorcerer of this era, the name that has been on the mind of every fan who has been speculating about this possible idea, this theory, and the most likely candidate that comes to mind was Noritoshi Kamo, the most evil sorcerer in existence. The reasoning for this comes down to something we learned about back in the prequel in Volume 0, is that vengeful spirits are humans who transform into curses after post-mortem due to an intense rejection surrounding the circumstances of their death. To me, this basically was the key point, that somehow within the past 150 years, Kamo had turned into a vengeful spirit and was able to take control of Geto's body at some point after his death 1 year ago. When someone has the label of the most evil sorcerer in history and the circumstances of their demise are left in mystery, the chances of them not being dead become more convincing when factoring in that possibility, as well as his connection to the Cursed Wound paintings. And moving on to the next section, when we look back on the series whenever it reaches its end, The one thing that will stand out to me the most about Akutami Gege's skills as a writer is how well he can draw fights. Gege has been doing an incredible job with the action sequences, mainly how the final attacks are presented and the impact that is felt when they're displayed. However, this is the arc I feel where Gege was at his best when writing the fights that took place in Shibuya, which is Yuji versus Choso. In terms of how every punch, kick, technique are executed, it stands to me as the best fight that we've gotten in the series. You have Yuji, who is still in his infancy as a sorcerer, up against a curse wound painting in Choso that is quite formidable in his own right, especially with his blood manipulation curse technique. And despite the difference in scale between the two, Yuji was matching Choso blow for blow in this epic encounter. With some assistance from Megami's recordings, Yuji was able to prevent Choso from activating his technique, which gave both fighters an even playing field to go all out against each other. Despite how things turn out with Yuji being knocked unconscious after having his liver stabbed, this fight told me that Yuji has grown to the point where even if he were to lose, his growth from where he was when he debuted up to now has been incredible, and that there is so much more room for him to develop into the ideal Jujutsu sorcerer he wishes to become. The notion that I've seen regarding Yuji's growth as a fighter being underwhelming is far-fetched, and he's done quite well for someone who is still classified as a rookie. He has forced Mojito to run from not just one, but two fights, one of which we'll be talking about soon, managed to take out Kezo, a curse wound painting in the Origin of Obedience arc, and make quick work of a cursed spirit on his own at the very start of Shibuya. To expect Yuji to be able to manhandle Choso at this stage is both unrealistic and wishful thinking. Despite losing the fight, both of their interactions will likely continue beyond this arc, with another twist coming into play, which is Yuji's memory manipulation, which I like to dub false memories for the time being. Just as Choso was about to send Yuji to the same place his brothers reside, he actually gets to meet them again, only instead it's in the manner that horrifies him to his heart's content. Choso sees a vision of him at a table with his brothers, along with Yuji acting as if they're one big happy family. This leads to Choso suffering a mental breakdown and departs the area to figure out what has been going on in his head. As for Yuji, he is met by Mimiko and Nanako of Geto's group as they prepare to force feed him one of Sukuna's fingers in their hopes of waking up the King of Curses. Over at the Inokashira line, we have Nanami meeting up with Maki and Nobito Zenin as they come into contact with another of the curse wound paintings in the form of Dagon. During this encounter, we learn some new and old details. Nobito's curse technique, projection sorcery, so far has been one of the most interesting and innovative abilities that we've seen by this point in the series. Literally, it's the power of animation, as he can turn 1 second into 24 frames, allowing the user to trace a predetermined set of movements by using the user's field of view as the angle of view. Given his position as the head of the Zenin clan, I had some high expectations for what his capabilities were as a combatant, and he didn't disappoint me with this level of display that we got to see during his fight with Dagon. Along with Maki and Nanami, the three of them consistently chipped away at Dagon, and despite the effort that was being put in to try and hurt him, Dagon proved to be quite the formidable opponent, as not even 2 grade 1 sorcerers, one of which was the leader of a whole clan, was not enough to exorcise the cursed wound. Once the temple began to accelerate, Nobito began to launch his attack, and Dagon was starting to feel the pressure that was being applied from the Zenin clan leader. Just before things would turn to Nobito's favor, another twist began to take place. Dagon had used his domain expansion, Horizon of the Captivating Skanda. What made this moment an eye-opener for a lot of readers was the fact that the scenery in which we were transported in was the exact same place that we first had met Mojito in the story after the fight between Gojo and Jogo. This would pretty much confirm that Dagon's domain expansion, his territory, served as the makeshift base of operations for where Geto and his group would hide from the public eye. Dagon began to enact his own counterattack, and with the use of his technique release called Death Swarm, which was an endless stream of Shikigami that pursued its targets like piranhas in bloody waters, his strength began to make its presence known by swatting away Nobito and neutralizing Nanami. And just before Maki was about to meet her end, the words of another who bears the blood of the Zenin clan entered the scene: Chimera Shadow Garden. Megami arrived in time, and after bringing Playful Cloud to Maki, it was time to begin the counterattack, or rather their attempt to hold off Dagon long enough for Megami to create another domain to begin their escape. You can tell that despite the earlier comments Nobito made about Dagon just being a lowly cursed wound, Dagon actually proved his worth in the short time he was active in the story. To not only push Nobito, the leader of the Zenin clan, to his limits, take one of his arms, along with even taking an eye from Nanami, he is someone I feel was the best example of how dangerous a cursed wound painting can truly become once they fully manifest into the world of living. Now, we thought things were already chaotic by this point. The fact that Gege was able to go up another notch with bringing in the stain of the Zenin clan, the deadbeat father of the century, and most of all, the one who left it all behind, into the fray during this escape mission raised the tension levels once again. Toji Fushiguro had arrived. Despite being the puppet of carnage that desired just one thing, to devour those he came against, his involvement in this battle proved fatal towards the survival of the group within the domain. Nobito could see in the eyes of Toji. He bore the face of the man he once knew long ago, but in reality, it was just a vessel that had been overridden by the DNA of Toji's that allowed him to fight in this state until it broke. Toji sought the strongest and went to work right away at Dagon. As I highlighted earlier about Dagon's feats, to throw someone like Toji, who wasn't even in his natural body, make quick work of the curse room, showcased to me how dangerous Megami's father was in his past, and of course what we're seeing now even in post-mortem. There was no traditional style when it came to Playful Cloud, because Toji had one thing in mind that triumphed all else: his desire to kill the enemy in front of him. Playful Cloud was practically the perfect weapon for someone like him. As with Toji, it is the only special grade curse tool that isn't imbued with a curse technique. Its strength depends on that of its wielder. With someone like Toji having in his possession, Dagon's fate was sealed the moment Toji got his hands on it. A ghost was the only way you can describe what was being seen from the eyes of Nobito to explain exactly who Toji was to Maki. He proceeded to shred Dagon to pieces as the latter's domain ceased to exist upon the death of the curse wound. And just when we thought they were in the clear, the puppet began to switch his focus on those around him. His target this time being the child he tried to sell off to the Zenin clan, his own son, Megami. While the father and son were being reunited, Jogo had intervened, making sure that Dagon moved on to the other side and made quick work of Naobito, Nanami, and Maki to incapacitate them from having any further involvement in the rescue of Gojo. After that, a shiver went down Jogo's spine, which told him that somewhere close by, a finger of Sukuna was near him, and that meant one thing: the vessel wasn't far away either. Before I dive into Sukuna's part in all of this, I really liked getting to see how Nanako and Mimiko viewed Geto as their savior. If you had read the prequel, you knew that it was touched upon briefly, but not as much as it was in the main story and the way that it delves into it. They generally loved this man from the bottom of their hearts for being the one to rescue them from when they were being orchestrated as monsters in their own village. Nobody heard them out. They were confined, treated as demons, despite not being the cause of their village's turmoil. And yet a random stranger intervened and saved them from the hell which they were in. They knew that they could never forgive Gojo for taking Geto's life, but they were okay with letting things be as they were. And because of that, they understood that the way that Geto viewed Gojo was akin to how the latter felt about him, that they were the best of friends. Geto's one and only best friend. To tarnish that person by taking their body and making a mockery of their memories that they shared with Geto by the act of living as a fake, the twins desired one thing: for this monster to be put out of its misery. And then we get to Sukuna's part, and to me, this was something that lessened my worries I had of Sukuna, that he would one day become nicer or understanding of other situations, as what he did to the twins was exactly why the King of Curses is to be revered and feared. He is someone that will never follow the orders of others, even if it means getting a reward out of it. Sukuna simply takes what belongs to him and dictates fate by his own hands. The twins' grave mistake in all of this was making the request that of a direct order, which sealed their fate as they were eviscerated within moments after Sukuna had heard them out. Sukuna then has his own plans of how he wants to take care of things, and going by what we have seen from the story, there's a good chance that those plans may have to do with Megami, which we know that he's been interested in him for quite some time. As the scene changes again, we return to Megami taking on his father Toji. Despite being unaware that the man in front of him is the one that raised him and Sumiki, Megami's mindset was to find a way to win against Toji. Toji's strength even as a puppet was formidable, as he matched his son at every turn and strike. Speed that rivals Sukuna's, but without curse energy. Toji is what we may envision as a fully realized version of Maki when she reaches her full potential. Megami tried his best, but no matter what he did, Toji was just too much for him. And when it looked like Megami's fate was sealed, memories began to overflow Toji. He recalls his last conversation with Naobito. Despite selling his kids to the clan he abandoned, Toji only wanted one thing, and that was for Megami to be safe and cared for. That place was of no use for Toji. However, for someone like Megami who has the potential to be something great, it'll be better for him to have that environment as his home rather than being with him. He didn't care anymore. And what is now one of my favorite moments of the arc, Toji asked Megami, "What is your name?" To which Megami replied with Fushiguro, his mother's last name. That's all he needed to hear. He kept his mother's last name and had not become a member of the Zenin clan. He wasn't warped by their ideals, and for the short time that he got to see his kid, he realized by just saying that he was his own man. This moment I felt is something that if you're a parent or even an older sibling, is something that might be easier to understand and convey, similar to how Toji felt. He had regained his consciousness and recounted the memories of his son, the one person in his life he cherished the most and wanted the best for him, despite walking down the path he did that led to his demise. To take his son's life, the life he had hoped would blossom into something great, would only tarnish what he started and would haunt him for the rest of his life. In a way, it would be like as if he were to curse himself at the end and prevented himself from becoming a vengeful cursed spirit. By doing what he did with no regrets, Toji ended his time with the vessel to ensure Megami's safety and most of all, preventing him from being haunted by a ghost that had long since passed on. It told me what I already knew, and that is Toji's most prized possession wasn't money, fame, or power. It was his son, and taking his own life to prevent tarnishing his child's growth into becoming the sorcerer he wishes to be was the easiest solution he could come to. Megami only had two things to take in after this altercation: the name Toji and his last words. I do feel that if Nobito were to inform him of who he was, I believe Megami is more mature enough to understand what had happened in this fight with them, and while not being fully emotional about the encounter, he'll come to understand why his dad did what he did and walk away from the situation content with how things have played out. Now he can go on with his motivation to become the sorcerer he desires to be, while also looking to protect the ones that matter the most, his friends at TMT, and his last remaining relative he cherishes the most in his sister Sumiki. Later on, we get to see Kusakabe and Panda encounter a set of members from Geto's group. The girl was the one that we saw that served Geto's secretary in the prequel, and the guy with the cool design that was present as well, who doesn't have a name. This portion was very interesting to see the ideology within Geto's group and how differing opinions were created and how to go about inheriting their master's will. The twins desired revenge while the other two wished to see out Geto's dream with no concern for his body, as they were still in the dark about the culprit's identity or the true objective. When it looked like things were about to come to a blow, Larway prevented that from happening, as they stated that their master wouldn't want them to go and act this way, as it's best to go their separate ways for now. However, they aren't to forget that the day will come when they break bread again as family. Now this part at the time and even now still hurts after the reread, given the circumstances of what had transpired before and during this arc. The twins are now dead after their wishes were denied by Sukuna, and Miguel has now seemingly joined TMT, currently serving as Okoto's bodyguard in his overseas trip. Their reunion will never be fully realized, and it'll hammer home in the fact that the way the twins went about exacting revenge may not have been the right answer all along. Maybe letting things be was the right choice, and because of that, these two survived in the end and the twins didn't. From there, the scene changes again to Sukuna versus Jogo, and let me say this, you know this arc by this point was already going crazy. When I'm seeing people animate the part where Sukuna is skating through the streets, Jogo's meteor, the first time we see Sukuna showcase that he has a flame technique, something that Jogo had no idea that he possessed, before sending the cursed spirit to the Shadow Realm to meet his friends. This wasn't a true fight. This was simply the Sukuna show as he manhandled Jogo with relative ease, and it was fun to watch. And while I enjoy what Sukuna did, that wasn't my favorite portion of this section. It was actually what happened after the fight that has resonated with me far more than it did on the first read. As Jogo meets the Ganon Hanami, you can already tell that he's met his end. That after preparing to meet Sukuna in a battle of flames, he ultimately lost. Death is something humans fear and detest. However, humans linger beyond it as well. Death is a mirror for humans. Mojito is that mirror. That entire dialogue from Jogo not only perfectly set the tone of this scene, but is a constant reminder of what we all deal with in our everyday lives. Even if it's not on our minds 24/7, there comes a time where that fear sinks in. In the case for this story, Mojito represents the thing that we fear the most. Looking into that mirror, seeing death and knowing that one day it's something that we're all going to have to face. And then came my favorite lines of dialogue in this arc. So, you wanted to become human. He tells Jogo that you simply wanted to take their place rather than become them. However, he lacked the hunger to take hold of those desires to reach the pinnacle that Gojo resides without a worry about the future or identity. Jogo should have burnt everything to a cinder without second thoughts to achieve his goals. Now, depending on how you view this part, I truly believe that in this moment, it wasn't actually Sukuna talking to Jogo. Instead, it was Yuji having gotten a grasp of his body back, filling his likeness into Sukuna to make it seem like he genuinely meant everything he said after. That despite defeating him, he had fun fighting Jogo. Of all the adversaries he's dealt with in the last 1,000 years, Jogo wasn't bad in comparison. So raise your head, stand proud, you're strong. Even I felt the emotions much more than I initially did when I read it, as Jogo realized that even in defeat, it wasn't completely for naught. For him, it was almost enough to accept this result, and that should he manifest into the world 100 or 1,000 years from now, he'll have bore a stronger resolve to see his goals through to the end, whether it's for himself or for someone else. After watching Jogo be reduced to ashes, Sukuna is met with someone from his past in the form of Urayume, the person that we saw back in Dogon's domain expansion way back at the end of the Kyoto Goodwill event. Urayume is a disciple of Sukuna's, as the latter tells him not to neglect their preparations, as his freedom from the shackles within Yuji is within sight. But before that can happen, he must take care of a disturbance nearby, which involves Megami, Haruta, and the Shikigami known as Mahoraga. Megami summoned it in an effort to take out Haruta, having known that without his domain expansion and unlimited energy, he wasn't going to be able to escape an encounter that easily. So instead, by summoning this deity onto the battlefield, he was willing to exchange his life to ensure that a member of Mojito's group would bite the dust. Just as Mahoraga was about to begin his rampage, Sukuna descended onto the battlefield. For the first time, we got to see him utilize the techniques that Jogo had hinted about earlier on: dismantle and cleave. Cleave is used for anything with curse energy within range, and for inanimate objects is when dismantle comes into play. Until Sukuna's domain expansion, Malevolent Shrine, goes away, it will continue to attack all targets within its guaranteed effective range, meaning within those 140 meters that his domain is encased in, all life will cease to exist as it's being devoured by its slashing attacks. Mahoraga's regeneration was able to withstand dismantle before Sukuna reverted back to his fire technique to finish the job and eradicate the Shikigami. While I wanted to wait until much later to discuss this part, I feel that this ability might be a maximum technique, the curse technique's most supreme art that was talked about in the most recent chapters. For it to be used with that open speech to show that unlike anything that we've seen before, it may in fact fall under that category for the time being. Sukuna, upon leaving Megami behind with Yaga and Yeri, shows Yuji the state of Shibuya. Yuji becomes sick to his stomach that what transpired here was all because of Sukuna, that his guard was down and that the King of Curses caused massive destruction to the city and all life around it. However, the one that will be viewed at fault by the public eye will be Yuji. He begins to question why he's still alive and that he should just die already, and you can't help but feel sorry for him in this situation as things went beyond his control and innocent lives were taken during Sukuna's rampage. Ever since the beginning of the story, he's wished to help people no matter what, and instead, the opposite had occurred. He feels that his resolve has been diminished because of what Sukuna did. Being branded now as a murderer is what is on his mind, and even if the world were to come to despise him, Yuji knows that he can't sit idle and he must act now. However, upon reaching the bottom of the subway station, more horror awaits him as he sees Kento Nanami having his body torn to shreds in the fight against Dagon and Jogo, barely able to stand on his 2 feet, meet his end. I've come to love Nanami's character long before this arc, and to see him go out like this by Mojito was pretty painful, and yet even with his demise, I felt his impact as a character is something to take into appreciation for the time that we spent with him. He was someone that didn't care for anything extravagant and kept himself away from others, only focusing on making money. Yet after rekindling his ties with TMT, he was able to meet people like Yuji who helped change his views on Jujutsu sorcerers, and that someday Yuji could be the person to overcome any obstacle in his way with the help of others by his side. And instead of saying something that would seemingly act as if putting a curse on Yuji, Nanami's final words are exactly what needed to be said in this moment. You've got it from here. We know that Yuji is the exception to Mojito's transfiguration technique. If anyone was able to take down this monster, it was him alone. Instead of telling him to run, he encourages him that he can do it, that he can end this curse's existence with the power he has obtained up to this point, and thus, the rematch finally begins. Yuji versus Mojito, round 2. This fight was something fans of the series were waiting to see happen since Junpei's arc, and with the tension levels at its absolute highest, it was time to see whether or not Yuji's resolve was alive or dead. The versatility of Mojito's skill set has always been impressive to me, and to see him do things like body repel to send a homing attack to Yuji, to pop out of a curse to engage in close quarter combat, showed you that you can't always expect the same thing from Mojito in a fight. However, the same can also be said to a slighter extent with Yuji. Fully expecting him to use Divergent Fist or Black Flash, Yuji instead used his title martial arts to land a manji kick to the temple of Mojito, and once he's able to make contact, he proceeds to lay his rage onto the cursed spirit through every strike in his arsenal. That versatility of Mojito's that I brought up earlier continues to prove itself as a problem for Yuji. Even though he isn't able to transfigure him, he can still do that to the others he possesses within his disposal in the form of the human corpses, going as far as to large parts of those corpses at Yuji from many angles, making it difficult for him to dodge in time without taking a hit. Even to disguise himself within the people he touches to land surprise attacks makes it troublesome for Yuji to attack Mojito without thinking if the person is safe or not, from the transfiguration. And he can also create weapons made from those transfigured people to use in combat. But most of all, Mojito knows that using those civilians to his advantage will help him break down Yuji's mental resolve, and he planned on adding another card to the table, which sees the scene change to the other half of Mojito encountering Nobara in the Donganzaka alley. I was initially worried for Nobara here because going from Haruta to Mojito was a huge difference in power, so to go up against even just a lesser version of the real Mojito was not going to be an easy task. And yet, she held her own, and while Yuji was dealing with the real version, Nobara was able to land her resonance attack on the double after forming a plan that saw her use her nails to pierce through Mojito's double, leaving him open to lay a critical hit in. The ricochet made its way to the real Mojito, aiding Yuji, who was about to get attacked from behind before the impact had stopped Mojito in his tracks. Realizing in the moment that Yuji isn't the only one that Mojito has to worry about, Nobara had now become someone who can harm his soul in her own way. The teamwork from opposing areas went into full force as Yuji began his counterattack, nailing a multitude of strikes onto Mojito, and you can see the confidence returning to Yuji as he's grateful to Nobara for reminding him that he's not alone in this fight, that he has people in his corner who will help him when he's in a rut or needs a kick in the ass to keep moving forward. Knowing full well that a change of plans was needed to regain the advantage, Mojito's double returns to meet with the original, and in the confusion, Nobara isn't aware that the real Mojito was now in front of her, in which the worst possible scenario had occurred. The hands of that monster were laid upon the face of Nobara. She had been struck by him and was affected by the curse's transfiguration. Realizing that she now faces death itself, Nobara recounts her life in 2009, the year that saw her move to the village that she believes that she was the only sane person in it. She only had one friend at the time, a girl named Fumi, who she had hanged out at her place and played Smash Brothers with her father. Nobara's personality that we've come to know for so long in the story was formed by the girl that she had met long ago by the name of Sayori. It's because of Sayori that she's now started to become more refined in her tone of speech and the way that she would act in front of others as a kid. However, her reason for that one day was gone. Sayori's home was vandalized with graffiti and trash. Snow was piled up intentionally in front of her house. What was once Nobara's sanctuary away from the village had become a shell of its former self. Sayori had departed the village, and Fumi couldn't recall what was said or what the weather was like that day. The only thing she remembers is seeing Nobara's crying face when she said goodbye to Sayori. Fumi didn't believe that someone like Nobara, who desired to be alone, would actually shed tears for someone else. Nobara would then leave her village in June of 2018, but swore that one day the three of them would reunite again. Meanwhile, we finally get to see Sayori in the current timeline, and she seems to be working as a teacher. I feel that this viewing of what Sayori had become since leaving the village was a sad reality check to take in. Being seen as this ray of sunshine, Sayori had become the complete opposite of the girl that she was back in the village. Life had caught up with her and changed her into someone with no signs of life in her tone and appearance, whether it's because of how society shaped her upon leaving the village or insecurities that had caught up with her, causing this change in how she perceives things. Nobara had hated the village for forcing Sayori to leave. It made her sick to her stomach that they forced their views onto Sayori, making it seem like she looked down on country folk, when in reality she was the one that was just simply different from everyone else. And that's how environments and communities perceive those that stand out. When you blend in, it's hard to notice how different people are. Sayori and Nobara were exceptions, and because of that, there was no way for that village to ever accept the two of them. Nobara's wishes to see Sayori and Fumi were again put on hold, at least for now. As she recounts her time at TMT, the people she's met, tells Yuji to let the others know that it wasn't so bad. What followed next was Yuji's remaining sanity breaking down upon seeing Nobara's body on the floor, missing an eye with no signs of life being shown. The emotional switch is triggered, and Yuji begins to break. Having lost to Choso, witnessing Sukuna's rampage, Nanami's death, and now one of his closest friends at death's door, Yuji's resolve had long since reached its limit. He has failed to protect another person he values on top of all the chaos that has occurred prior, and like the true villain he is, Mojito uses his chance to hurt Yuji, utilizing a black flash of his own before bombarding Yuji with words to further decimate his already broken soul. Mojito has always been ruthless in the way he invokes his acts of evil through battle, but his words weren't to be minced. He berates Yuji for entering Shibuya without any real determination with his sense of justice. Because of that failure, lives were lost and he can't rewind the clock to fix them. They were at war and he treated things like they were a simple battle. Both Mojito and Yuji were one and the same. One kills without a second thought, and the other saves people without a second thought. Whose ideals would stand the test of time, Mojito's or Yuji's? Without realizing that, Yuji had no chance of beating Mojito. This was the reality check that Yuji desperately needed, as what Mojito said was factual. There's no restarts in war. What's done is done. If Yuji's resolve was more polished and filled with real determination to see things through to the end, those losses that occurred during this arc might have been reduced or avoided had he come into this arc with a far stronger resolve. Luckily for Yuji, he was able to regain it and keep moving forward with the aid of Aoi Toto's arrival onto the scene. If anyone was going to bring his confidence back up after being broken down in the way that Mojito did, it was Toto. Yuji's mental breakdown began to consume him by this point. He tried to right the wrongs of Sukuna's killings to help more people in Shibuya, yet what happened afterwards saw the death of Nanami and Nobara being fatally wounded. His conviction that he believed in was nothing more than an excuse to cover up the tracks of a murderer. Yuji bears the greatest burden and curse in this series, and that is being in possession of the King of Curses. Not many people that get the chance to know him will understand how his mind works and what he's like in conversation, because at the end of the day, he's viewed as the vessel of Sukuna. The moment something like what happened in Shibuya were to occur, he becomes the enemy of the world. And for someone that strives to be by others when it's his time to go, having those bonds destroyed because he failed to control the monster within him robs him from ever accomplishing that dream. Reminded of what he's been entrusted with, and when Nanami's final words, his wounds suffered previously being put on hold thanks to Arata Nita and the insurance that Nobara hadn't kicked the bucket, Yuji arose back onto his feet once again to continue on with the fight against Mojito. Yuji and Toto vs Mojito was in a way the perfect handicap match that one could ask for. You had Toto, who was an experienced sorcerer at this stage in his life thanks to have been taught by Yuki Tsukumo back in the day. Having someone like Toto to work alongside Yuji helped balance this fight out, which was not only allowing Yuji to grow during this fight, but making it believable enough that he wasn't too far away from holding his own in a 1v1 against the likes of Mojito. Boogie Woogie has been viewed as one of the best in-act curse techniques in the series, allowing him to switch places with another person or object by clapping his hands, and during this fight it proved vital in many situations against the likes of Mojito, who with one touch to anyone not named Yuji could turn fatal. With that in mind, Toto used his ability of his to ensure that Yuji is able to get in a close enough distance to harm Mojito with Black Flash, Divergent Fist, and just about as many attacks needed to damage the cursed spirit's soul. Before returning to the fight, I've talked about plenty of moments that have been my favorite in this arc, and the one that comes right after in chapter 128 is very high up among them. A train makes its way over to Shibuya Station. Sitting in one of the passenger seats is fan favorite and Kyoto's own Kasumi Miwa, holding in her hands one of Mekamaru's badges as he tells Miwa not to head to Shibuya as the battle should be nearing its end. This is where I feel Miwa's character finally comes to life at this moment in the series, as well as for my full appreciation towards Mekamaru for being the guiding light to help Miwa to help find her resolve to continue living. From her debut, at least for me, Miwa has been more of a comedic character that I couldn't view as someone I would generally come to feel for if tragedy befell her. Then came the evening festival, and that changed right away, with Mekamaru's passing being the catalyst for it. Miwa's heart-to-heart with Mekamaru taps into the emotional side of the arc with how much everyone has suffered throughout it. Mekamaru reassures Miwa that she wasn't weak at all, for he was the one that was too weak to protect the person that he loved. Even though he believed that he may not have been the one that Miwa wanted to protect her, he asked that she find her happiness, and that no matter how it's done, as long as she's happy, his wishes will have come true. Miwa had now become a character that had a goal to accomplish by the end of the story, to find her true happiness, whether it's to fall in love with someone that will be there for her through good and bad, or to become a sorcerer strong enough to overcome all obstacles that stand in her path. Whatever it is that Miwa seeks, she now has something to keep fighting for, so that Mekamaru's passing wasn't in vain. Return to the fight between Yuji and Toto vs Mojito. The battle between both sides continues to heat up, and it takes itself onto the surface level of Shibuya, where we begin to see everyone go in during this battle to the death, the last chance that they all have to curse each other. Mojito further established himself amongst the elite for how well he was able to withstand multiple attacks from both sorcerers, along with the use of his soul multiplicity, which when used can form souls with weak rejection into one body, which he likes to call polymorphic soul isomer. By splitting his body with an 80-20 split, Toto deemed the part with the lesser value to be where Mojito's soul was inhabited in, leaving that for Yuji to settle on his own. Yet Mojito had to remind the Kyoto third year that if you underestimate me, it'll mean your end. What makes Mojito more impressive throughout this fight is that he isn't an established expert at all. He's someone who has manifested into the world just not too long ago. For someone to be around for this short of a stay, being this dominant in the fight, and has not even realized his full potential yet, Mojito could become the ruin that brings the demise of all sorcerers if he were to ever reach his peak. Activating his domain expansion and coming face to face with Sukuna, informing him to stay out of this fight with Yuji, the violence has turned up a notch, with Toto losing a hand in the fight. Initially this looked to be a major problem, as for Boogie Woogie to work, it would require him to have both hands. However, we learned that Toto can still use the ability with one hand as long as he's able to make contact with another to activate it. However, it comes at a cost, and because it's with Mojito, his right hand is then damaged in the process, and it renders Toto unable to use it again. Despite it, it was enough for Yuji to connect with Black Flash, damaging the the soul of Mojito. Knowing full well that the danger that Yuji possesses to harm Mojito, the cursed spirit then begins to transform into what he believes is his true form, the true essence of his soul. Instant spirit body of disordered killing. Now, I can't lie, at the time, I still love the design of Mojito's new form, but the name, it could use some work as it's a mouthful to say every time. At the very least, this upgraded version of Mojito didn't disappoint as he and Yuji went at it mano to mano in their deathmatch. I've been a huge fan of Akutami Gege's choreography when it comes to the fights, with how seamless every punch, kick, and blast are executed, especially how it goes from panel to panel to show how the movements are distorted and lost in the mix. Not to say it's on par with Akira Toriyama's, who I feel is the gold standard when it comes to laying out fights with his art. Gege is showing some great potential to be up there one day as the series progresses. At this stage, Mojito's body starts to feel the impact of Yuji's strikes. As we come to learn since the Choso fight, Yuji can now control Divergent Fist. Born out of his bad habits and having lost it due to his curse energy improving, Yuji can now adjust the time lag in waves of each strike to land the necessary damage to hurt his opponents at will. And say he were to further enhance it to do more than 2 impacts, increasing the power of them to go with controlling when it happens. I pray for anyone who wishes to fight Yuji in close quarter combat by the end of the story, as its full potential could see him being a force to be reckoned with. The climax of this fight was a lot different than I thought it would go, given that there was a perfect time for Yuji to exact his revenge against Mojito. Now was the time. Having been tricked into thinking Boogie Woogie still worked despite Toto confirming he was already dead, Mojito was met with Yuji's Black Flash and was sent flying, reverting back into his original form. Depleted of transfigured humans and realizing that death draws near, we see the side of Yuji that was expected to be his mindset when this mission began. He never wanted to accept him, but as time progressed, Yuji realized that he is just like Mojito. He doesn't think of his actions when saving others because that is his belief of what's right, the contrast to Mojito's reason for killing because that's what he believes is right. But none of that matters to Yuji in this moment, as the only thing on his mind is to eliminate Mojito. He ascertains Mojito how far he'll go to make sure he erases his existence. If he came back as another curse, change his name, his form, he would continue killing Mojito at every turn that he came back into the world of the living. He no longer needs to find meaning or reason behind those actions, and that 100 years after he dies, the meaning behind them will become apparent over time. Viewing himself as a cog in the grand scheme of things, Yuji knows what his role in the story is. For as long as he can, Yuji will continue killing curses. He knows that his fate was sealed when he consumed the fragment that possessed Sukuna's presence. His life will never go back to normal, and what awaits him at the end of his journey is death. In this moment, the one that had become prey to Mojito had now evolved into the hunter. Knowing full well that Mojito had awakened the murder instinct of Yuji, he attempts to flee for his life, and I love how the portrayal of this scene was handled with Yuji as the wolf and Mojito as the rabbit. For as long as he's been around the story, Mojito has been the hunter and has done nothing but hunt those he views as his prey. To have the roles reversed here was great in showcasing 2 things: that Mojito is still very much an infant in the sense of understanding how the world operates, and that his bite wasn't able to match his bark. For that reason, he now flees the wolf brim to the top with the intent to kill in Yuji Itadori. So we're getting our perfect ending where Yuji exacts his revenge and we all live happily ever after, and this video finally ends about that. Just when it looked like Mojito's end was near, Geto had appeared to aid the cursed spirit from being devoured. Moments earlier, we see the perspectives of what occurred after Jogo's meteor had hit Shibuya before the current events. However, the person that caught my interest the most out of all this was Mei. It is clear that Mei is now no longer in Shibuya, having fled to Malaysia at some point after a clash with Geto, overlooking her very questionable relationship with Uyui. They were able to escape certain death thanks to her brother's unknown curse technique. While we're not sure of the person that she was speaking to on the phone, it seems that they're from North America, indicating that it's morning where they were, as opposed to Malaysia where it was 10:30 at night. She informs this person to sell all stock in Japan and the real estate that she has in Tokyo. Now, when it comes to the economies in the world and Japan ranking 3rd, it leaves 2 places for the top spots, being the United States and China. And given that the person on the phone was calling in the morning, it means that they belong to the former. This indicates that Mei has ties to the United States through business arrangements or something further that connects to the Jujutsu world. While details regarding that are foreshadowed later on, it's safe to say we won't be seeing Mei in Japan anytime soon. I don't want to assume right off the bat that she's turned cold on TMT, but she's more so a neutral in my eyes until further evidence supports that she's in bed with opposing forces rather than her brother. As we return to Geto arriving in front of Yuji and Mojito, the former TMT sorcerer proceeds to attack our main protagonist using a multitude of cursed spirits within him to show Yuji the difference between what he just fought in a special grey curse versus one of the 4 4 special grade sorcerers. The being within Geto then states that had the forces never been split during the night parade of 100 demons, Okotsu would have been defeated by Geto. This may very well have been the case given that the prequel depicted of Geto being only able to use a limited amount of his resources during the fight with Okotsu. Although we still need to see how much Okotsu has grown since Rika's departure, for him to retain his rank as a special grade tells me that he didn't regress and might have gotten better during his overseas trip. Despite this being a very short line, what Mojito said to Geto is kinda ironic yet fascinating to see him say. I knew that after all, I was born of humans. Mojito knew that at some point, Geto would try to capture him and use him as part of his plans in the future, and that is exactly what Mojito had done to Junpei, using him for his own plans. I don't see Mojito's role in the story ending here, as he still has so much more to offer in the story as Yuji's eternal rival. Any other person defeating Mojito that isn't named Yuji wouldn't sit well with me given how prominent he has been to our protagonist's growth since they first met. We also learned about the maximum techniques, which apart from domains are said to be the most supreme arts of curse techniques. The first instance we saw of them in the overall timeline happened in the prequel during Geto's fight with Okotsu with the use of Uzumaki, which makes a reappearance again in chapter 134. I felt that something like this, for one, being confirmed as canon to the story, helps expand upon the power system beyond what we know of it. Not to say that it's limited, but I've always felt that there was something needed to further expand itself upon. Luckily, with now this being a new staple in the power system, we can see more sorcerers showcase maximum techniques throughout the series. After explaining how Uzumaki works in consuming Mojito, Geto notices that Geto's soul was trying to catch him off guard as the members of the Kyoto branch make their move. Nishimiya patrols the sky and the rest of the group had advanced. While Mio's attack was stopped without much effort from Geto, I love the determination she had for herself in this moment. Recalling her past and what led to her becoming a Jujutsu sorcerer, she remembered why she didn't want to be a burden to her family and didn't want to die. Even if it meant that she would never swing her katana again, she was putting everything, her present and future, into the attack. To have her confidence be realized here and stood up for herself to assure that she wouldn't live a life with regrets was a beautiful moment. And then the moment we've all been waiting for since chapter 90 finally came into fruition. Choso arrives onto the battlefield and his heart begins to beat like crazy. Standing before him is not someone named Geto. The scar reminds him of who that person really is. Choso had 3 parents, a mother, the cursed spirit that impregnated her, and the man who mixed his blood with theirs and toyed with his mother, thereby earning the wrath of Choso. The man that we've been calling Geto was in fact the most evil sorcerer in history, Noritoshi Kamo. But then there's a twist that you'd only realize by paying attention to what Geto said that would have major implications towards the identity of who that person is within Geto. Noritoshi Kamo is but one of many names. Call me whatever you want. If you see the image again of Kamo having the exact same scar as Geto, this pretty much tells us that what happened to Geto occurred with Kamo in the past, that some other deity had taken over Kamo and possibly forced his hand into committing many sins that earned him his moniker. I have my suspicions as to who exactly that person could be, but that would require for it to be talked about in its own separate video, and the fact that this one has gone on long enough. Just know that this line isn't something to overlook and to keep in mind for what's to come in the future. As Choso goes to attack Geto, Urayume intervenes and we get to see them in action for the first time. Urayume unleashes their innate technique, which allows them to create and manipulate ice, as it's on a higher level where one wrong move would see those encased torn apart. On top of the fact that they possess a reverse curse technique that allows them to heal their wounds rapidly, Urayume within this one chapter has already cemented themselves as one of the characters to keep an eye out for after the events of Shibuya. When it looked like Choso was to meet his end, Yuji escapes from the ice prison, which may indicate that on top of poison, Yuji is resistant to ice thanks to possessing Sukuna. Whether it's because of it's part of his binding vow with Urayume that gives him the impression that they're one of Sukuna's followers, it could be something that was done to prevent himself from ever being harmed by those who swore fealty to him in the past. Urayume has seen enough and using Icefall prepares to eliminate everyone in the area save for Yuji, who which Geto requires as his messenger. And just before disaster strikes, a tall woman with a big butt like Jennifer Lawrence bursts onto the scene, asking Geto the question she has yet to receive an answer to: what kind of girls are you into? Yuki Tsukumo, Toto's mentor and one of the 4 special grade sorcerers, has come to help Yuji and the others. His conversation with Geto not only was the perfect way to close out the arc, but to set up the future of the story after Shibuya. Recalling their last chat before Geto went rogue, Yuki relates to the mad shaman that no matter the method, humans will evolve one stage higher, and that stage involves breaking away from cursed energy, something that Geto denies as he believes is to be optimized for the best solution. The importance of Master Tengen's barrier helps neutralize the curse technique within Japan from leaking out, which explains why why there are far and few sorcerers and cursed spirits abroad overseas. The ones capable of becoming sorcerers through Tengen and controlling the cursed energy are the humans of Japan. The United States and the Middle East would not remain silent if Japan were to make a move, indicating that in their ranks they may possess their own set of sorcerers and cursed spirits. If a war were to occur amongst all sides, it would only bring suffering upon to the world, a world far removed from the ideal that Yuki pursues. Geto doesn't wish for a world without cursed spirits and doesn't care for a peaceful world either. He wishes to see how far he can take the potential of humanity by plunging into chaos that not even he can control. Having extracted Mojito's idol transfiguration, the horror show finally begins. Using a remote activation of the technique, he awakens the two types of non-sorcerers he has marked: the people who had ingested cursed objects like Yuji, and those with cursed techniques whose brains were meant to be non-sorcerers like Junpei Yoshino. And among them is the most important person in Megami's life, his sister Sumiki Fushiguro, who reawakens from her coma in Saitama. That wasn't easy to turn the page and see Sumiki wake up after learning what we did in the Origin of Obedience arc revolving her circumstances. Given the position that Megami is in, along with the fact that he'll eventually learn this, the identity of Toji Zenin, this will be a lot for him to let his mind take in, along with a potential danger threatening the world. To make matters worse, Geto breaks the seal on the cursed object. Some have been asleep since being exposed to his cursed energy at the time of marking, but will soon awaken. To have them deepen their understanding of cursed energy, he will pit them against each other in countless fights. To him, is the equivalent to releasing over 1,000 malevolent Yuji Idoris into the world. Having heard enough Geto's blabbering and realizing that his mind is too far deep into the abyss, Yuki tells Yuji to prepare for battle, but they are met with an unexpected turn of events. Urayumi's ice begins to melt as Choso's piercing blood technique was filled with his own blood, causing it to act as a poison inside Urayumi's body. When the sorcerers get ready to advance again, Geto stops them in their tracks as he's yet to finish talking. The cursed objects that he provided are what remains of the sorcerers he made vows with millennium ago. However, they weren't the only ones that Geto entered contracts with. Those vows he had in place are null and void once he obtained Geto's body, and thus a multitude of cursed spirits, some as old as 1,000 years ago, spiral out of Geto and surround our TMT sorcerers. Bidding farewell to Yuji and looking forward to see what's to come from him, Geto makes his departure. Before leaving, Geto tells Sukuna that it's beginning once again, the world of Heian, the golden age of cursed techniques. And with that, thank God, the Shibuya Incident arc has come to an end. An arc that has spanned for 58 chapters but has brought forth many unforgettable moments in it. It has seen the growth of many characters and where they will still need to improve on if they wish to accomplish their respective goals by the end of the story. It was filled with tons of tragedy, including the demise of some fan favorite characters in the process, massive reveals that have changed the outlook of the story in more ways than one, and the most important part is where we're now entering uncharted waters from here on out. Nobody knows exactly what will come of the world now that Geto has awakened those that have been in slumber for many years. Gojo's imprisonment means that those lurking in the shadows will descend onto the scene and wreak havoc in his absence. Yuji no longer has the backing of Gojo to protect him from the higher ups, meaning that him staying in Japan is not the safest option to consider. There are many different ways that Gege can take the story, and whichever way it'll go will further elevate the series to new heights, just as the Shibuya Incident arc did during its duration. Overall, my rating for this arc for now is a 9 out of 10. I truly feel that when it comes to a series' first major arc, this one will be up there among the very best when it has time to settle in and watch how the rest of the story plays out. The impact of what's to come will be detrimental to how Shibuya will be looked at upon further revisits. Depending on how the events of the story play out and how significant the impact of this arc has for what's to come, it could see me appreciate this even more than I already do, as there is nothing of staggering negative criticism that I can see that would warrant it having a lower score than that, outside of maybe if you didn't enjoy a certain aspect that it offered, but in reality, this arc exceeded the expectations I had going for it when it began. It has become one of my favorite weekly reading experiences that I've enjoyed in quite some time. I was already a huge fan of the series since its inception, but this arc has cemented Jujutsu Kaisen not only as one of my favorite ongoing stories, but in general as a whole. Let me know what you think of the Shibuya Incident arc down in the comments. Did this arc in any way change how you feel about the series? Was there anything you wish we could have seen happen in this arc that you felt might have been a missed opportunity? Where does it rank among your favorite first major arcs to a series? Share your thoughts down in the comments below. Like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. If you want to be part of the weekly experience when it comes to my coverage of Jujutsu Kaisen week in and week out, make sure to do that. Click on the bell to Shandora to stay up to date with everything that goes on the channel. Be sure to share the video, of course, amongst the Jujutsu Kaisen community if you want people to have somewhere to go and talk about this arc, this analysis, discussion, recap. Make sure to send them over here. With that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video. Commodore Lad signing off. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, take care.